Continuing Mobile Education for Emergency Medical Services Providers. Episode 1, I Think She Has a Living Will. Advanced Directives in the Field. Participants will understand the concept of advanced directives, be able to define DNR and MOLST, and understand how DNR and MOLST forms can assist the pre-hospital care provider in the field.
Advanced directives is kind of a broad term to describe different ways of communicating what your end-of-life medical care preferences are.
Advanced directives are specific instructions prepared in advance that are intended to direct a person's medical care if he or she becomes unable to do so in the future.
DNR orders are orders that are signed by a physician and a patient, or there are other situations where they can be signed without the patient signature, but they're basically end-of-life decision on whether to resuscitate a patient or not.
A do not resuscitate order tells medical professionals not to perform CPR. This means that doctors, nurses, and emergency medical personnel will not attempt emergency CPR if the patient's breathing or heartbeat stops.
Medical orders for life-sustaining treatments. So the idea of the MOLST is that it's a comprehensive document really describing the end-of-life wishes of a patient. That would include resuscitation, invasive procedures, feeding, comfort care measures, transport, etc. So it really covers a wide gamut of issues, and as we may have heard on this program already, is something that was piloted here in Onondaga and Monroe counties and is really moving to be a statewide in New York as well as several other states.
Medical orders of life-sustaining treatment. The MOLST form is a bright pink medical form signed by a New York State licensed physician that communicates patient wishes regarding life-sustaining treatment to healthcare providers. The form includes issues regarding CPR, intubation, artificial hydration and nutrition, future hospitalization and transfer, as well as antibiotics.
In the pre-hospital setting, they're so important because they're a guide for the EMTs as far as what care or the optimum care or the ultimate care that's going to be given. It's when we don't have those forms and we're looking at life-threatening issues that it can be a little bit troublesome and encumbering because we don't have legal paperwork to withhold treatment.
Yeah, it's too numerous to count how many times I've encountered a patient with an advanced directive, but most of that is really just transporting a patient that needs the standard care or palliative care sometimes. The times where an advanced directive really comes into play where they don't want the heroic methods or efforts to resuscitate, those are really not all that frequent, but usually they're pretty clear cut. And the classroom is probably arguably the most difficult thing to explain. But on a real ambulance call, on a real EMS response, usually it's pretty straightforward what the family wants, what the patient wants, what the physician had agreed to should this day come. There's very, very rarely a situation where there's confusion. And if that's the case, then like I tell my students, I always try to pawn that off to a higher level, whether it be a medical control physician or an ALS provider that's coming down the street, something along those lines. You try to get someone at a higher rank, if you will, to make the decision as to whether you should or shouldn't work on the person.
We've had several. One that really stood out in my mind was a patient that was end stage with several chronic illnesses, and one of them including some cancer, but other things going on, that had gone home. The family panicked because there was an issue. We responded. They could not find paperwork. They could not share with us the actual wishes. Then did produce a DNR. Initially the patient had not entered into full cardiac arrest. Then did. While they're finding the paperwork, we proceeded to provide CPR and actually resuscitated the patient, who then lived for about a week and a half in intensive care and then finally perished. I happen to know the family in that case, and we had some discussions later on, and it really just complicated the whole thing. They had come to the point of acceptance of what was happening, really wanted a peaceful process at the end, and it was really disrupted, and ended up having to do it in an intensive care unit with a lot of invasive procedures, and it just didn't work. And we could not really help that situation because we only had DNR, not like a MOLS that would help us make the decisions. And unfortunately, at the time, the paperwork was not presented, and there was confusion among the family members that were there. So clearly is an issue.
I have had cases where we've responded to the home and it's obviously a critical situation and an end-of-life issue. You're going into that situation with an adrenaline going because you've already heard that it's a serious call. It changes gears and can change gears pretty quickly when there is an actual do not resuscitate order, because then you're looking at comfort for the patient, comfort for the family, and there's not that high level of anxiety.
To work with advanced directives, first find the forms. Then establish with the healthcare proxy if the orders are still valid. If there are questions, utilize medical control. Transport the original forms with the patient and hand the forms to the accepting physician. After finishing this episode, you should understand the concept of advanced directives. You should be able to define DNR and MOLST and understand how these forms can assist the pre-hospital care provider in the field.